In those days, a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be registered. This was the first registration when Quirinius was governor of Syria. And all went to be registered, each to his own town. And Joseph also went up from Galilee, from the town of Nazareth to Judea, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and lineage of David, to be registered with Mary his betrothed, who was with child. And while they were there, the time came for her to give birth, and she gave birth to her firstborn son, and wrapped him in swaddling clothes, and laid him in a manger, because there was no place for them in the inn. There's a Christmas tradition that happens every year, and that is they seem to find all of these songs that we don't hear at any other time of the year and play them again and again and again if you happen to have your radio on to listen to them. One of those songs kind of became an earworm for me. I don't know if you ever get those, but you can't help but hear it in the back of your mind. The song beginning to look a lot like Christmas. And I thought about it for a while, and I thought, is it really looking like Christmas? And I looked out the window, and there's 4 feet of snow. That's a Saskatchewan Christmas. The nights are getting longer. The sun's going to be going down at about 2 in the afternoon and not back up until 11 or 12 o'clock in the morning kind of thing. That's happening as well. But the lineups at the stores are crazy long already. Even though we're not supposed to be lining up that long and we're supposed to be wearing masks and all of those kind of things, I guess, in some ways it's beginning to look a lot like Christmas. But like so much this crazy year, 2020, it doesn't seem to feel like Christmas very much. In fact, as I was getting ready for this message and talking with Joyce about the variety of things that go on, it seems as if all of a sudden Christmas is upon it, and we've got to make something out of it, because in this mixed up year, what else can we do? Some of us are not even in the mood for Christmas. Let's just take it off this year, and let's not worry about it. Let's put all of those traditions aside, because we've got to put some of those traditions aside. Let's put all of the traditions aside, and let's just try and make it through. Well, that being said, we're not going to just leave it there. Christmas has a tradition of preparation. In fact, the whole idea behind the lighting of the Advent candles is the aspect that if you follow the readings of the church, these are the beginning of the new year. In fact, today is the first Sunday of the new year. And over the next 3 Sundays, or the following 3 Sundays, we're going to get closer and closer and closer to Christmas Day, to the time when God became man and dwelt among us. Advent is a season, is a time for we in the church to renew our hearts, to renew our minds, and with God's help, renew our spirit. And oh, we need it so badly this year. A lot of us are sick and tired of all of the nonsense and all of the things that are going on, and opinions from the left and opinions from the right, and which way are you going to go, and how far do you push it, and all sorts of things like that. Who knows? We are here this morning to begin the celebration of the birth of Christ. We are here today to recognize that we don't gather in the church just because it's a thing to do on Sunday. We gather here because God loved this world so much that he sent his only Son, Jesus Christ, to live in this world and to be a part of this world. Even the Christmas story, the Advent story, goes on past the birth of Christ to the visit of the Magi who come bearing him gifts. Why? Because not only is he a baby, he is also king. And the gifts of the Magi tell us that, and we'll be talking about that closer to that time as well. So over the next few weeks, I want us to spend time retelling the Christmas story. And we're going to be using, as I said, Luke chapter 2, verses 1 to 20. And this morning, we're going to look at those first verses. Let me just read the first portion. It says, "In those days a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be registered. This was the first registration when Quirinius was governor of Syria, and all went to be registered, each to his own town." I think it's to humanity's discredit that we have sought to explain away the phenomena of Jesus in the ways and the things that we do and say about the Lord, and the way that we act when we're talking about him. Luke, the gospel writer, the one who wrote this letter, this gospel, was a man of science. He was a man of logic. He was a man of proof. In fact, the prologue to both his books in the New Testament, this gospel and the book of Acts, are an invitation to a man named Theophilus to look at and figure out the truth. It's an invitation for this man and for all of us to examine the facts. One of the church we pastored had a woman in it who was very vocal and well known in the church. She didn't have a tremendous reputation, but people were a little bit scared of her because, or afraid of her because she was very talkative and very open and very critical about things that she didn't agree with. Even though she grew up in a church and had good teaching all of her life, she ended up with a very, very narrow theology. It was just, it had to be a certain way and a certain thing that God was about. And if we didn't agree with her, or we didn't like what she said, we were the enemy, and she would get upset and angry at the people around them. Although she'd say she wasn't angry, but it was obvious that she was doing some things that were as if she was angry. She had become enamored with some of the newer ideas about Jesus Christ, because it was the only way that she could defend her theology. And what ended up happening was that her theology informed her view of God. And we should never allow our theology to define our beliefs, but rather we should only allow the truth to define what we believe. What we can see as fact, what we can understand as true, needs to be the things that we use in order to define who our God is and what this story is all about. It can lead to travesties when we go about it the other way. The Nazis believed that Jesus couldn't have been Jewish because he attained so much in his life. So they began a viewpoint or a view in which it was a German soldier who was there in the Roman army who fathered Jesus and other things as well. In our weekly Bible study, we've been looking at a number of kings because Daniel's ministry involved a number of different kings and kingdoms of his time. And whenever they talk about where we are in history, they use that king as the focal point. So they will say, this is in the 3rd year of Nebuchadnezzar, or this is in the 7th year of King Cyrus, or whatever the case might be. Time, we've talked about, is established by the reign of the king of the time. That's why, as Christians, I believe that one of the major things that we can contribute to the discussions in the world is the fact that we are living in the reign of our King. In fact, that's been recognized from many centuries before. There's a little addition that we put onto numbers sometimes when we're talking about centuries. It'll be 200 or 300, but we'll put the little addition on there, A period, D period. which stands for Anno Domini in Latin, which means in the year of our Lord. Luke tells of a decree. But he doesn't say this is in the 4th year or the 10th year or the 2nd year of Augustus. We forget who Augustus was. Augustus was the nephew of Julius Caesar. Augustus was the first Roman emperor. The very first. Caesar didn't make it. Caesar got killed on the steps of the Senate. Augustus was the very first, the very measure of what emperors would look like for the following centuries. And Luke just says, oh yeah, it's when Augustus Caesar ordered this. But he doesn't say what day. He doesn't say what year. Rather, he is believing in, or he's seeing that something more important than the reign of Augustus needs to be pointed out. And he points out as well, he narrows it down even more. He says it's during the first registration under a man named Quirinius, who we have historical evidence, and we're able to focus and get back to pretty well the date that Luke is talking about. By the way, we're out by about 4 years in the way we look at things. It's actually 2024, not 2020, which means that COVID-19 has been around for 4 years longer than we want it to be, and we've been waiting for 4 years for the government to give us a vaccine, and we're going to have to wait who knows how much longer until it happens again. Well, I digress. But this period of time is something special. This is the beginning of the living Lord, the living God upon this earth. And Luke says, I challenge you to prove that it's not historic. I challenge you to prove that it's not factual. I challenge you to prove that it's not important, that it's not unifying, that it's not awe-inspiring. And it was an important time in the life of Joseph and Mary for a number of reasons. And because it was a taxation, it wasn't something that just happened magically and specially. It was something that happened on a specific day, at a specific time, and it was a time that Mary and Joseph took to go back home. Luke's account now focuses on one family and one branch of the family. He says, and Joseph also went up from Galilee, from the town of Nazareth to Judea, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and the lineage of David, to register with Mary, his betrothed, who was with child. Joseph is introduced into the story at this point in time. For us who have read the scriptures a number of times, we realize that the focus on Joseph ends very quickly. He does not live in or near his family's home area. He's from the tribe and the clan that was built around Judah, and where David came from, and where the city of Bethlehem is part of that whole mix. It's the city of David, but he doesn't live around there. He lives about 100 kilometers away or so. We're not told why at this time he lives that far away. We later find out that he's a carpenter, and Jesus, by inference, becomes the carpenter's son. Maybe it was a place where he could find work. Maybe it was a place where there was a multitude of trees that made it easy for him to make a living. We're not sure. It may have been the fact that he had a girl pregnant who was not his wife. It's possible. We're not told about that. But they were told that they needed to go back to Bethlehem to have themselves counted in the census. The idea behind the census was that they could figure out how much money each territory should send back to Rome. And if you didn't have that much going back to Rome as you were required to as a governor, they'd replace you as governor and find somebody else to do it. So it became very clear that they wanted to get as much money from where they were back to Rome as they could, as quickly as possible. And so everybody had to go back to their town to register because it made the governor look better in the eyes of Rome. And so they embarked upon a journey. It's an uphill journey to go from Galilee, which is a sea, to go uphill toward the city of David and Jerusalem. You have to travel uphill. And you're traveling with a pregnant, very pregnant wife. In fact, in the biblical story, Abraham's wife dies on this same trek and is buried in a place on this trek that Mary and Joseph have to go upon. And so it's not easy, it's arduous, it's dangerous, it's inconvenient for them to travel. Not just simply getting into the car and traveling to the relatives. This was something that took a lot of effort and a lot of planning. We find out that they are of the royal bloodline of the house of David. A few years ago, 30 or so years ago, we got a letter in the mail saying that for X amount of dollars, or for free anyways, we could have an initial search done on finding our coat of arms. I don't know if you remember that scam going on a few years back. And so just for fun, I sent it off and said, yeah, I'd be interested in getting an initial look at our coat of arms. By the way, Hugo's were not necessarily crown princes by any means. But we thought, well, this would be an interesting thing, or at least I thought it would be kind of fun to do. And so we got back, about 3 weeks later, I got back a letter with our coat of arms. It was a kind of a coat of arms, and in the middle of it was the letter H, capitalized. So, because my name is Hugo, and obviously our coat of arms is going to have a capital H on it. By the way, in Ukrainian and Russian, in the alphabet that they use, there is no H. In fact, when they wanted to talk about Adolf Hitler, they called him Adolf Hitler because there was no H. Hugo is actually a form of Yahweh or Jacob. We're not sure exactly which one, but it isn't an H that's there. And so you can imagine my surprise that my ancestors would have put a capital H onto our coat of arms, even though they wouldn't have known what a capital H was at that point in time. But I got a letter back and they said, yes, we found this, and are you willing to spend some money to find more? No, I wasn't willing to spend some money. We're not sure about Joseph. He's of the royal line of David. Maybe he was in line for the throne, number 738, in line for the throne. By the way, that kind of degree of separation plus $1 will buy you a cup of coffee at Tim Hortons whenever you want one. But Joseph came back to a place of honor, a place where royalty was the norm. And he had one additional problem, that even though he was betrothed to Mary, he wasn't married to her. And she was with child. Now, we look at that idea of betrothal, and we sometimes don't have a modern way of looking at that. In all intents and purposes, Joseph and Mary were married to each other. Betrothal, no matter how long it lasted, meant that you would marry. There was no other choice. There was no other person who could get in the way. This was a promise, and at the proper time, at the right time, they would get married. They were fully committed to each other. But even so, because she was pregnant before they had officially tied the knot, it created a lot of social stigma. And Joseph, we're told in another gospel, could have divorced her. And what that would have done for Mary is it would have been Joseph saying to the rest of the world, my wife or my betrothed is a prostitute. She is pregnant, the child is not mine, I do not want her around, I want to be cleared from her, I want the record expunged, and everything put away. But he didn't. He chose to keep the child. Why? Because we're told in other Gospels that God had spoken to him as well. And told him there is something special about this child. You're not going to believe it. You're not going to understand it fully. You're going to have difficulty comprehending it and explaining it to the people around you. But this child comes through the power of the Holy Spirit, and he will be your son. Now, these facts were known by readers and early witnesses. They understood what was going on with Joseph and Mary. What an interesting framework to work upon for the Savior of the world. Now, that's why I love the Scriptures, because the Scriptures don't read like many of the ancient texts do, where their heroes do crazy, incredible things that nobody's going to believe. And here we find in the midst of Luke's writing about the Savior something that is so personal and so significant it can't be anything else but truth. She was pregnant, but it wasn't his child, but it wasn't any other man's child. He was the child of God. For God so loved the world that he sent Christ to be with him. What about the family? And while they were there, the time came for her to give birth. And she gave birth to her firstborn son, wrapping him in swaddling clothes, and laid him in a manger, because there was no place for them in the inn. Somebody was saying before the service how full this church used to be. Yeah, we remember days like that, and wonderful memories, and we can get back there again, I think. Just going to take some more work on our behalf. But we used to attend a larger church, and of course in the larger churches they want to get as realistic as possible. So for their Christmas pageant they sent out the word for live animals, and somebody brought a donkey. That was a lot of fun to have the donkey on the platform. There were geese, there were chickens, there were pigs, there were all sorts of animals up on the front of the church and the platform in front of us. Somebody had brought ducks and put them into a cage. The ducks didn't know what was going on, because all throughout the pageant, the ducks were quacking. Quack, 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 quack. And Joyce and I were sitting there listening to this, wondering, I wonder if anybody else is going to catch on that maybe these ducks need to be quieted. And about halfway through the presentation, somebody behind us goes, shh, loading his shotgun. And everybody in our area started laughing their heads off. Nobody could figure out exactly why. Bethlehem was the town of Joseph and Mary's family. And yet here we find them on the night that Jesus was born, looking for a place to put their heads down to sleep. We're going to have a different Christmas this year. It's not going to be the way we remember it. But I challenge any of you who have to look back on Christmases past and not remember a time when you slept in somebody else's bed, or you slept on the floor, or you slept in the corner, or stayed up all night, or whatever else, because there was just no other places for you, because family had got together and everybody wanted to be around you and to enjoy being with you, and so that you could help them in the morning cooking and all sorts of things. But it was something that happened. And yet here in this entire town, the town of their family, nobody had any room for them at all. And I kind of wonder if Mary's pregnancy didn't have something to do with that. We can only assume the stigma and the shame that must have been upon Joseph and Mary. These are just young kids for the most part. Mary, we think, was in her mid-teens. Joseph was not that much older than her. Imagine that kind of stigma being with you. And how scary it would be. And how you would want your fifth cousin or your aunt or your great-great-great uncle to reach out their arm and hand and put it around your shoulders and say, no matter what happens, we're going to be there for you. No matter who complains, we'll stand beside you and help you work it out between them. This night is a very special night. Mary and Joseph would have rather been anywhere else, I think. They could have been back in Nazareth. They could have gone deep into their house, sat on the couch or whatever they might have been able to sit on, closed the blinds, make as if nobody was around, nobody was there. They weren't there. Had the baby and kind of brought gradually the little child out into the world so that they would gain some acceptance. But I think they find themselves with the spotlight right on them. Welcome home. Well, that's with the girl. It was a night of first for Mary. This was her firstborn. Maybe you remember your firstborn, ladies. I remember my firstborn. This was her first son, and Joseph's first son, by the way. This was the very first bed that he was laid in, was not a bed of a family friend or a place of a relative. It was a simple stable where nobody cared and nobody was interested anymore. They say that when Secretariat, the horse, was born, they try and have the birth of thoroughbred animals as close to January 1st as possible because it gives them an advantage as they grow. If I remember right, she was born on January the 2nd or 3rd. And the owner who went around to the stables to check on the horses who were birthing at this time came into the stable just at the time that Secretariat was getting up on her feet for the very first time. And she wrote one word in her journal, and that word was, wow. What did you write in your journal when you came to the understanding and the knowledge that Christ the Lord has come into this world? Wow. Luke is saying to us, these are the facts. I've talked to people. I've looked at things. I've been there. I have touched things. I have smelled things. This is the truth. Accept it or not. May the Lord bless his word to us today. We're going to sing a hymn in closing.